Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through the major news and topics facing importers and manufacturers in China and Asia today.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Adrian from the team, joined by our CEO, Renaud. You're listening to episode 89, and this week we're covering the topic of a guest post that you actually wrote recently on Harris Bricken's China Law blog, Renaud.
Correct. They run it as a guest post. Yes, and it's because it's interesting also to their audience because it talks a lot about how to structure, the relationship with a supplier, a manufacturer, and talks about intellectual property rights and a host of other things. Yes.
Yeah. So what you did in this, you highlighted the two main models that can be used when developing and manufacturing your new product in China. And as you've mentioned, IP protection, this is something we've spoken about many times and written about. This is obviously something that's important to a lot of people listening, I'm quite sure. But it's more than that, isn't it? What's you're going to cover? You're going to talk about maybe some expectations when you're working with these different types of supplier. What can you expect? What should you expect? What sort of risks are there? And hopefully anyone that's sourcing at the moment and thinking of developing that new product, this gives them a good grounding to go out and find the right kind of supplier, right?
Right. So, it's not just about IP rights. It's about, you're going to develop a new product. How are you going to do the engineering design? So we're not talking about like a new pair of pants or something of that nature, or something like still relatively simple and so on. No, we're talking about electromechanical products, as we often do on this podcast. So it can be like electrical home appliances. It could be, electrical bikes. It could be earbuds. It could be a very wide range of products, or there might be no electronics, it might not be electrical at all, but still, we're talking about new products here. So a product with maybe some mechanical elements, with maybe some custom parts that require maybe some tooling and so on. So really new products that require some engineering design, and that's where the question becomes, so where are you going to do that engineering design work? So you're going to do it yourself, maybe, you're quite talented as maybe a CAD designer and so on, maybe it's only mechanical, you can handle all of it, great. But in most cases that's not the case. People who have ideas and are good at seeing what the market needs, and who are good at selling the idea and getting some interest and getting some funding, most of the time they are not accomplished engineers who can handle all the aspects of the product design. So
right.
So what do they do? Do they hire their own team? Do they hire a design house? Do they do a little bit of both? Right? So maybe they hire one person to do some of the design and the mechanical engineering, and then maybe for the electronics and the firmware, maybe they go with a design house. That's quite common. And then maybe there's an app to run on a smartphone, and maybe they find yet another external designer, maybe, because that tends to be, let's say a lot of work front loaded and then less work over time. So very often they will pick maybe someone on Upwork to do that. So that's one option, basically doing it mostly in your country or with freelancers that you pick who will work remotely. And in that case, usually, well, you pay for the work and you expect them to do the design and to send you the design files, and you own all of that intellectual property. I mean, you need to get them to sign an agreement for that. Otherwise, it may not be the case by default. Usually, it's not the case by default. So you really need to get them to sign something. But yeah, basically, that's one model. And then the other model is you rely on a manufacturer. You say, okay, you guys are going to make this, but I need your help to do some of the engineering, to put the prototypes together until we're all okay, and then do all the rest of the work until you're ready for mass production. Well, not so simple, right? And in some cases, it's a hybrid approach where maybe they don't want to do some of the design. They give it to the manufacturer and they do some of the design themselves. But to simplify, let's say there are two models. If you keep everything in your hands or with your own team or your design house or some remote engineers, and you control everything and you will get all the files and everything, I would call that the Western approach or the Western model, in opposition, in contrast to the Chinese model. The Chinese model, why do I say that? And I got a little bit of pushback on LinkedIn by someone saying, hey, it's a little bit ethnocentric, don't focus on China or not China. Of course, that's true. But if you look at 95% of the Chinese factories and they see a company that comes to them from the US or the UK or Germany or Australia and say, hey, we've been thinking of this cool product. Here's the way it would look like, but we need you to work on putting some prototypes together. Well, 95% of the Chinese manufacturers will say, okay, maybe down the road you'll have to pay for tooling or something, but the design itself and picking the components and everything, yeah, don't worry. I mean, we're manufacturers. We know exactly what we're doing. Just let us do it, right? And so that's what I call the Chinese model, because it has a number of implications.
So we've got these two models, Western model and Chinese model, we're calling it. Okay. I think now's the point to kind of summarize the features of these models and their sort of pros and cons. So starting with the Western model, then Chinese model, and then we'll finish off by maybe going into a bit of a discussion about how you select which one is better for your needs. And that's going to vary depending on, what sort of business you are, what sort of product you're trying to bring to the market. So the Western model then, tell me about that, please.
Well, what I kind of call the Western model, and again, it's not the best name, but it's really, sure. I want to make it extremely clear to people that when you come to China, they have to expect that the dominant model that most manufacturers will tend to follow is a different one, right? So that's my point. So in that model, the company that owns the product, comes up with the product idea and is developing the product, will want to have transparency on everything and want to control everything, right? So during the development, design and development, they will pay for the work. They will pay contractors if it's external. And that's it, just contractors, right? Not partners, right? Which is more of the Chinese approach. And what does that mean? So they pay for all the work, as I said. They receive all the deliverables of that work. And that is really, really critical, right? So if we cut that into two topics, let's say technical topics and supply chain topics. On the technical side, well, there's going to be CAD drawings, there's going to be maybe schematics and layout and so on the electronic side. There's going to be some code, some source code for the firmware. These are the deliverables of the design work. And of course, there's going to be prototypes put together with that. But prototypes themselves are not the only output, not the only deliverables. And people need to always keep in mind, do I have the latest version of the design files? Okay. If you have the latest versions of the design files, well, if you're not so happy about the engineer who's working on that, maybe they're very busy with something else, maybe they're not doing a great job, it keeps failing, well, then you hire another one. And if you're really in a hurry, maybe you have two teams working in parallel, right? Some companies have been known to do that. If one suddenly disappears, that's safer, and it gives you more control, because you can then decide who you work with, not only during the design and development, but also manufacturing, right? You go to a manufacturer and they don't do a good job, well, you still have everything in your hands to go to another manufacturer and get them ramped up faster. The other topic is on the supply chain side. The components and the materials have to be picked. There might also be some surface treatments, plating, anodizing, e-coating, painting, and so on. And sometimes it's really critical to the aspect of the product. And there might be actually a lot of work to find the right supplier for that kind of surface treatment. And same thing for the supplier of the batteries and the supplier of certain components and so on. So this information under the Western model is all known to the buyer, typically.
Right.
However, they will pay for the sourcing work, right? If it's not exactly the same product that is already being made by the manufacturer, or that was already developed before, say, by the design house, well, there is some work to look for that and qualify the suppliers and so on. And it can be a lot of work. There's always some critical components in these products, right? It could be the display, the battery, the PCBA, whatever, maybe the enclosure and so on. There's often at least 4 or 5 critical parts. And if you don't qualify the supplier, you might end up with very high defective rates when they start to make a lot of parts in mass production. And that is really extremely expensive, right? So again, you get to pay, but that's the price for control.
And that's another one of the key deliverables. Like earlier you mentioned, you really want to be getting up-to-date product designs, files. Well, that also goes for the sourcing information, because all of this is feeding into a BOM. Now, whether you've got access to that BOM or not is the big question, I suppose. But as you said, when you're dealing with CTQ components or materials in particular, that's information that you're really going to need to hand, aren't you?
Oh, yes. The BOM is extremely important. Even more so, I would say, for electronic components, because the parts that go on the PCBA, it's an integral part of the design. You cannot just say, well, that's, and these are the active components, this and this and whatever. Okay, but what kind of chip is it? Well, can't really tell you. Oh, then how do you go back at re-engineering everything? It's a huge mess.
Yes.
Whereas, if there's a plastic part and okay, it's EVA or it's PP, or okay, then that can be sourced from a number of different suppliers, right? Except if there's tooling, of course. The tooling is critical in that regard. All right. So people often think of intellectual property rights and like they will steal my product and so on, but it's really about control at the end of the day, right? Control of working with who you want and stopping a relationship that is not working, right? If it's a manufacturer that does that, and it's, there are a number of contract manufacturers that work like that. Okay, you tell us about your product requirements, you give us the aesthetic design and, some direction, and we'll do some of the work. We send you prototypes after we test them and so on and so forth. You will pay for the work, You pay for the materials that go into the prototypes. You pay for the testing. You get it. You get everything little by little as it is updated. All right. Then in that case, if you already work with a manufacturer, the big question is what keeps them honest and what keeps them motivated? Well, usually there's a contract, right? There's a development agreement, product development agreement. I think we talked about this before on this podcast a few months ago.
Yeah, we did.
It makes it very clear, who is to do what and who is to pay for what and when, right? And who owns the resulting intellectual property and who gets the deliverables and so on and so forth. So there's a contract in place, and if it's much harder than anticipated, well, the manufacturer will just show, okay, this is all the challenges that we have, your design is not mature, it's not, this is the situation. Do you want to increase the budget or do you want to simplify the design, right? Most of the time, that's the kind of discussions that would come up toward the start of the design work, because sometimes you really have to do some of the work, put a proof of concept together, and so on, to really understand all the implications of the design and all the complexities that come with it. So there are pros and cons. If I summarize a little bit about that Western model, the benefit to the customer is that they know what's going on and they learn about the process and they have control. And the drawback is that there's always uncertainty when you design a new product, you develop a new product. There's usually some technical challenges, sometimes very serious. And at the beginning of the project, it's very hard to plan for all that before any serious feasibility study has been done.
Yeah. And
it means your budget, might balloon quite a bit. But it's not the designer's fault. Actually, it's, you came up with a certain product and a certain concept and so on, and how it should work. And certain, some of the challenges might not be very, very obvious, right? And another drawback is that the company with the product idea will have to pay for everything. We'll have to pay for the tooling and so on. That's the cost of keeping control over your supply chain, basically, right? So that's the model.
Okay. And so transparency, I'm getting a lot of this, and I suppose that's very relevant as we move on to the second model, right. And everybody's going to see the big differences between these two models now. So when we move focus onto the Chinese model, let's call it, what can you tell us about that?
Well, the Chinese model is in certain ways the opposite. The Chinese business environment in general is not very transparent. It's quite opaque, actually. And people have always been reluctant to share too much about their network and, the certain things that they really value. They think there's a lot of value in that, and they will not open it up to other people. That's simply, a cultural element. Now, they might do a great job. I'm not saying they always do a bad job, okay? I don't want to be misquoted on that.
Sure.
I'm not saying that the Chinese model is bad. I'm saying that you cannot expect to have control over your supply chain and to have some serious visibility into your supply chain if you go with that model, all right? So the relationship is basically, hey, let's sit down together, have a good dinner together, have a good feeling, make sure we're a good fit for each other, and let's be partners, all right? That's sort of the approach. And what does that mean to be a partner? Well, the Chinese manufacturer will look at the product idea, the design, and whatever proof of market traction, if possible. Anything like that will motivate them, and they will make a bet right? They will make a bet on you on your project, and they will kind of try to estimate the amount of work. And if they say, well, we can make a lot of progress in a couple of months, and we'll be very close to mass production, then it's kind of tempting to them. So they make a bet. They do a lot of the engineering for free and the sourcing usually completely for free, which of course means the incentive is to go fast and not do it very thoroughly, and not do a lot of design reviews, and not do very what I would call proper supplier qualification, and most of the time they don't even think of reliability testing, for example, to confirm that the design itself really is going to last as long as necessary. And so that's one of the incentives. You need to look out for that. If you do not make it very clear, black on white, that you want certain deliverables, then you will not get these deliverables. So if you want to go down that road, that's fine, but you need to be very, very clear about, what exactly they will do and what deliverables you will have. And it's, again, you're partners, so you might think, they wanted to succeed. And it's true. It's true. It's just that usually your Chinese counterparty thinks more short-term than you, in business anyway. Now, in their lives, they think maybe more long-term than you. But in their business, it's just a fact that they tend to think more short-term, more, am I going to make money from this in this quarter or at the end of the week? Even sometimes they're thinking, with that kind of time horizon. So you need to be mindful of that potential disconnect. So a lot of communication will help a lot. Okay, so as I said, they do the engineering, they do the sourcing, but usually they do not send the engineering files, they do not send the bill of materials. Again, except if you negotiate for that. But if you negotiate for it, you have to be aware that you need to be very specific. And I've seen a lot of companies say, hey, they confirmed in the contract, we'll have the bill of material. And then I say, okay, well, show me the bill of material. And it's got 3 columns. Okay, well, what can you do with that?
I mean, it's a bill of materials.
Yeah. And maybe the prices that are there anyway are all inflated by 10%. And you cannot even check because you don't have the contact information or anything. So it's not worth a lot, let's say, in that case. And then they say, okay, we get the electronic file and so on. We got the firmware. Oh, but you don't have the source code. Oh, does it make a big difference? Yeah, obviously. Oh, well, no, they're not sending me the source code now for some reason. And you have to be aware, if you go in that direction of working with the Chinese manufacturer on the product design and development, they themselves follow that model with their own subcontractors, and contract specialists. They don't always do everything in-house. So when they do some specialist design, they might engage one of the subcontractors. And these subcontractors, they will never give, for example, the source code, if it's the firmware. So your Chinese manufacturer will never have the source code anyway, in that case. So you can bang on the table as much as you want. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get it, even if they would like to give it to you. Because their own subcontractor is dealing only with Chinese companies, and they will never, that I can really confirm, 99% of them, it's just their business model to keep it in their hands. Because next time you want an update, you have to pay. Even if it's a tiny update, it's going to be 5,000 RMB minimum, right? And every time you want a tiny update, BIM, they're going to charge for that. It is their business model, right? Because they did not charge much the first time, because, hey, guess what? The manufacturer would not pay a lot for that. So it's kind of the game, right? When the expectations are in a certain way, you cannot change that halfway through the project, you have to make the assumptions and all the implications and your requirements extremely clear, black on white, and get them confirmed, and really into the details. That's really the situation with that Chinese model, right? Then the question is, what keeps that manufacturer honest and motivated? Well, you should definitely have a development contract, product development agreement signed with them anyway. That's one thing. I mean, I can't think of any situation where you want to have a company work on your product design and development without an agreement that really specifies some of the basic terms of the contract, for sure. But in many, many cases, we see companies that do not have a development agreement or have some kind of agreement that is not enforceable against the manufacturer. So in that case, well, what keeps them, motivated is, well, we're developing a product, but it's basically our product. They're giving it to us, and they're giving us great feedback when we send them some prototypes. And then we'll have our hands free. If they give us big orders, we'll produce for them, we'll be happy. Well, if we have a better opportunity, we will see, right? That can be very motivating, but you got to be careful because it's not necessarily in your interest. Okay.
Scary.
Now, right. Also, and in most cases, really that's the case, and I'm not sure, but I would say for small and medium-sized companies, that has to be 95% of the cases at least. The buyer does not have the engineering files and does not have the BOM. So at one point, even if they're not happy, because maybe the price of the product is much higher than anticipated or whatever, communication is not good, everything is slow, they will still tend to keep working with the same manufacturer and going to production with the same manufacturer, because otherwise they're going to start from scratch with another one, right? Okay, we need to do the PCBA design all over again, and we need to do the mechanical designs here. It's going to go a little bit faster because hopefully they have approved prototypes in hand, but it's going to take months and months again, right? So the incentive for the customer is, to keep the same manufacturer, even if they're not happy about it. So they become a captive customer, right? They're hooked. They cannot really go away. And it can be extremely frustrating. It can be infuriating. And that's why we tend to cover this topic, regularly, often, pretty often on this podcast, because that is really this misunderstanding and wrong preparation or lack of preparation from the buyer side is at the source of so many issues, right? Another problem is, again, as I said, the time horizon for the manufacturer might not be very long, not very far off. So they, and as I mentioned also, there are going to be some technical challenges, and the more new and the more complex the product, the more this is likely, the likelier it is. So after 2 months, 3 months, they haven't made that much progress, they're going to tend to lose motivation. And if it's 4, 5, 6 months, a lot of them, they will just end up dropping it. You got to be careful with that. You got to be careful. So to summarize, the pros and cons, well, the investment is lower for the buyer for sure, and they kind of trust the manufacturer as a partner, so they don't have to spend a lot of time. Maybe they say, okay, well, it's fine. They get it covered, and they will send us some prototypes. We'll review it, and we're not going to spend any more time looking at it. We're just going to focus on the sales and marketing side, right? But we're not going to spend any time on managing the project and looking at the operations and so on. Okay. And when it works well, that's great. That they have a partner that is really invested in their project. They have a lot of time to spend on sales and marketing. They don't have to put a lot of budget on design and development. Great. That's when it works well. The problem is, as I mentioned, the incentives really in that model, in many cases, the incentives are wrong for the manufacturer. The incentives are for the manufacturer to do the wrong things. That's really the problem. So if you come back to them with a development agreement, but they've already started some of the work, forget it. They're not going to sign anything in most cases, right? And as I mentioned, they might skip, because it's their incentives, they might skip a lot of steps that really should not be skipped. They will say, this supplier is fine, we have some friends that buy from them. Yeah, I never have any problem. We'll be fine. Reliability testing. What is that? I mean, if you want, the product I will send to you, you can do it yourself. You don't need to go into all these complications. Come on. And, what do you mean, a pilot run? No, it's fine. Maybe everything will be fine. No problem. Let's go straight into mass production, right?
Oh, man.
And that's how you end up with a really bad batch of products, right?
Indeed.
And when you're in that situation, and also the manufacturer says, it's much more expensive than we thought. Hey, prices to go up 40%. Well, you kind of, as I mentioned, you're hooked. You can't just go freely to another supplier. You can have a backup supplier ready to go, right? So that's and also to come back to the intellectual property issue. They might believe that it is their product. I mean, you didn't really pay for that. A lot of the engineering they did on their own, and the sourcing and so on. And they might think that they are a bunch of geniuses, and without them, you wouldn't be able to develop it at all. Hey, really, it's, again, as I mentioned, it's the key word here is partner. Trust us. We're your partner. We're doing this for free. You don't need to worry about all that. Just trust us. Don't look. Just trust. Right? That when it works very well, that's great. We've seen a lot of cases where it doesn't work nicely at all. So that's the problem.
Yes, yeah. Well, with that in mind then, and the last point for this episode is how to select which model's right for you. And there are pros and cons for both. So to maybe look a little bit more at the types of businesses and products where the Western or Chinese model might be better.
Well, anything that's got to do with medical products, pharmaceutical products, automotive OEM parts, etc., you got to go Western model, basically. Just because the cost of failure, is going to be tremendously high. You need the transparency and the control. And anyway, the requirements from your customers will be that you have that transparency and that you do a lot of the reviews and everything on the design and so on. So there's no choice. Now, when you go to consumer products, the most obvious way to segment it is, do you anticipate large sales and can you get the necessary financing because the project is very promising? If yes, then go for the Western model because it's worth financing all that work. It's worth it because then you will be totally in control of your project. You will not be relying on one partner, right? So if the economics can justify that, do it. Now, if there's a lot of uncertainty, you're really not sure, it's kind of your first product, and you don't have a great handle on the sales and marketing side, and you can't really pull out the money to finance all that, well, then try to sell your project to a Chinese manufacturer. And they might recognize that it has some legs, and they might, quote unquote, invest, really become a partner, do a lot of that work for free. With the limitations that I mentioned, and you still get to have some kind of development agreement with them, but you get to be aware that if you come with a contract that's enforceable in China and puts a lot of limitations of what they can do and what they will own and so on, they might not be that interested, right? They might just push back on it.
Sure.
So it's a little bit of an art. Yeah, you need to sell. You need to sell your project anyway to somebody. In that case, you sell it to the Chinese side, to the Chinese manufacturer. And you will need to keep them very motivated all along, as I mentioned. Otherwise, it's going to be a next shiny object, and they will go to it. So that's the most obvious, high sales volume versus not so high. Yeah, another one is, do you need to develop the product from scratch, or do you want to work with a manufacturer that has already developed something similar? So if you develop something that's kind of a new thing, in the market, I don't know, one of these devices to grow, plants, maybe vegetables or whatever in your office or in your home, this is a booming category. I see a lot on Kickstarter, and we're working for a couple of them actually. And this is totally new. I mean, you're not going to be able to go and find a manufacturer that opens their showroom and show you 20 different designs of that. That doesn't happen, right? So you have to do it from scratch. Now, the opposite example would be the tablets, tablet PCs running on Android.
Oh, yeah.
Well, are you going to develop your own tablet and so on, and select and develop your own chipset and everything around it, do a lot of testing and so on, pick your own camera, display and so on? Or will you go to one of the, I don't know how many there are, I mean, there must be 40, 50, 100, I don't know, tablet manufacturers in Shenzhen, and pick one of them that has a model that's already not far away from what you want, and that will adapt their firmware and maybe the external casing, and maybe do one or two changes on the key hardware parts, just to really fit your needs. Well, obviously it's going to be faster and much cheaper, right? So in that case, you better, quote unquote, partner with one of them. Now, the good thing is that there's a lot of them, right? So you can pick, and if you come with the right volume of prospective business, they will be interested. If it's 100 pieces, they're gonna laugh you out of the room or out of the Skype call. Right. But if you're talking about 20,000 per batch, well, they will talk. They will be interested. Many of them will be interested. There's a lot of other considerations, I guess, but these are the ones that come to my mind first.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. I mean, this is good information for people who are preparing to develop, manufacture a new product. And, this can help influence sourcing decisions. And maybe that expectation needs to be tempered when dealing with certain Chinese manufacturers. And everything that's promised may not necessarily come without strings. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because as you mentioned, these guys, they're often specialists in their field, and they can fill in a lot of the gaps that maybe need to be filled in for people that just don't quite have that that in-house experience or expertise, I guess.
Right.
Well, thanks, Renaud. That was a guest post from you on Harris Bricken's blog. I will leave the link to that in the show notes, so please do have a look at that. You've mentioned IP protection, of course, the choice of different types of suppliers. We've podcasted about this, we've blogged on it. I will leave more links also. But until next week.
Hey, thanks, Adrian, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.